A woman disappears from her own home, and everyone believes she has been replaced. Julian moves on with Serena, thinking the past is gone and the truth will never return. But far away, Eleanor is not defeated. She is silent, watching, waiting for the right moment. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one preparing the most powerful
I
comeback.
have some difficult news.
And when the truth finally rises, everything
Your mother has
changes.
left.
Value and lesson. Never underestimate
home.
someone who stays silent.
you'll be
They
very
might be
happy here.
preparing the strongest
Absolutely
return of their
perfect.
life. If you
Do you think
enjoyed
she
this
saw
story,
us?
please give the video one like and one share to support the channel and motivate us to create more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The night Arthur Sterling introduced his new protégé at a fundraiser in their Park Avenue penthouse, he gathered his 3 children in the library, looked at their confused faces, and said, "Your mother has to remain in Geneva to finalize some family matters." His wife, Chloe, 7 months pregnant, was an ocean away in a quiet Swiss clinic, watching the life fade from her father's eyes. She had no clue that the security clearance to their private art vault had just been copied for a guest. She had no clue another woman was drinking champagne from her wedding crystal. And she had absolutely zero idea that in less than 3 days, she would become one of the most feared and unseen players in the international art world. What Arthur didn't know, what no one in that sleek, minimalist home knew, was that Chloe's father was Etienne Dubois. The Etienne Dubois, the legendary recluse, whose collection was the secret backbone of modern art valuation, with a $60 billion portfolio of masterpieces, gallery shares, and private trusts. And every last painting, every sculpture, every dollar of that cultural empire had just been passed down to a single person, his daughter. The same woman Arthur had just given guest access to her own collection. The same woman whose carefully curated digital catalog of their family's memories was now slated for a system purge. The same woman whose 12-year-old son was in his room, quietly cross-referencing the serial number on the new woman's watch from a party photo with a database of recent high-value auction sales, connecting a name to a face before his father could delete the evidence. But this is the point where the tale you think you know takes a sharp turn. Chloe didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't fire off a single desperate text. She mourned her father. She studied his private acquisition ledgers. She spoke with the custodians of his estate. And then from a secure laptop in her hotel room, she infiltrated the main display at the Art and Finance Symposium, an event Arthur's hedge fund was sponsoring, and watched his face drain of all color, turning to a pasty shade of terror as he finally realized whose name was now listed as the sole proprietor of the Dubois Trust. What she did after that is something his professional reputation will never recover from. This story is going to walk you through 3 moments where Chloe was nearly broken. 2 moments where she thought she had everything back under control, only to have it snatched away, and 1 final silent order that will make you want to stand up and cheer. Stick around. Every single detail matters. This entire narrative is based on 1 principle. Silence is not surrender. Inaction is not weakness. And the most powerful person in the room is almost never the one making the most noise. It's the one who understands the true value of the assets and waits for the perfect moment to make one decisive move. If you have ever been cut out of your own creation, been underestimated, or had your work claimed by someone who was supposed to be your biggest supporter, then this story is for you. If any of this is resonating with you, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single update in this saga. Drop a comment and let me know. When did you figure out Arthur's life was built on sand? Was it giving another woman access to the vault, the plan to erase Chloe's history, or that public takedown at the symposium? I read every single comment, and your perspectives are always brilliant. Share this with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you stick with me to the very end, you'll discover why the most brutal move is the one made without a single word. I'll catch you in the next chapter. The night Arthur Sterling brought his mistress home, he stood in front of his children and told them their mother was essentially gone. He had come to believe his own story. He'd practiced the words in the reflection of his Bloomberg terminal for days, adjusting his tone, working on an expression of reluctant sorrow, creating the perfect image of a man pretending to be heartbroken while secretly feeling the pure thrill of a fresh start. By the time he gave that speech in the library of a home Chloe had spent over a decade curating, the lie had become so ingrained in his mind, it felt like a market-tested fact. But thousands of miles away, in a secure, climate-controlled vault beneath the Swiss Alps, a team of 4 art authenticators and lawyers in discreet suits were logging into a private network. They carried encrypted drives, they spoke in clipped, precise phrases, and they held the digital and legal instruments that would systematically dismantle Arthur Sterling's entire world before he even had a chance to chill a second bottle of champagne. But this story doesn't start in that vault. It doesn't begin with legal trusts or encrypted asset transfers. It starts 12 years earlier with a woman who learned to hide her own genius for a man who was terrified by it. If you think you've heard this story before, trust me, you haven't heard this version. The penthouse overlooking Central Park was Chloe's masterpiece, from the specific hue of the gallery white walls designed to catch the morning light to the last piece of custom hardware on the library doors. She had selected every surface: polished travertine floors, museum-quality lighting systems, a Spartan kitchen with a single block of Italian marble she had personally chosen from a quarry near Carrara, while Arthur was at a banking conference in Dubai. She acquired the rare first edition art history books for their library from an estate sale in Paris, flew there twice to supervise their transport with her son Leo, and installed them herself before Arthur got home and asked if she had finally gotten rid of those dusty old books. She never expected him to get it. She finished cataloging their first edition numbers after he went to bed. The children's paintings were displayed on a rotating digital gallery in the hall, not just uploaded to the cloud, but professionally scanned and presented. Because Chloe knew that when you treat a child's creativity with dignity, you teach them that their own vision has inherent value. And kids never forget that. Leo, at 8, had drawn a detailed floor plan for an imaginary city. Sophie, at 6, had created a digital comic about a lonely robot, with a color scheme so emotive it seemed to hum. Little Ben, age 3, had made a series of joyful splatters on a canvas that he insisted was a portrait of their golden retriever, Winston. Chloe had saved every single piece on a triple backed-up private server, complete with metadata and a brief audio file of each child describing their work. Pinned on the kitchen's smart screen, with a digital icon of a magnolia blossom, was a shopping list for the challah bread she baked every Friday. Her art auction catalog was on her bedside table, open to page 312 of an analysis of post-war German artists she hadn't gotten to finish. Her ballet flats were by the door, placed neatly side by side, a tiny ritual she did every morning. And on the wall in her small home office, in a simple frame that was always there, was a quote printed on fine paper. "The frame is not the art." Her father had scribbled that on a napkin for her after she spotted a clever forgery at a gallery when she was only 10, sitting in his chaotic Parisian study surrounded by the scent of old paper and strong coffee. The point was that flashy presentation was for amateurs. Real mastery was in the subtle, unseen substance that gave a piece its true worth. She had built her entire life on that idea, like an invisible foundation. The apartment smelled of her, of fresh peonies, and the clean, woody scent of the linen paper she used for sketching, and something so peaceful that visitors could never quite identify it. It smelled like a home that had been thoughtfully curated and deeply cherished by a mind that saw the beauty in every detail. And none of it, not the peace, not the 12 years of a woman building a home and raising a family from scratch. None of it was any defense against what was coming. Here's something you should probably write down. The first sign of a total system failure is never the big explosion. It's the tiny error message you dismiss. The second credit card he has for business expenses. The text messages he deletes the second you walk into the room. The kiss that used to be a real connection and is now just an automatic gesture. Always pay attention to the little errors. They are the warning signs for a story that is about to be completely rewritten. Chloe had 3 children. Leo was 12, quiet and methodical, with his mother's gift for seeing the underlying structure in things that left other people baffled. He read auction histories and books about art restoration. He noticed everything, saw every pattern, and only spoke up when he had identified the one detail that changed everything. Chloe called him her little curator, and it was the highest form of praise she knew because she had been one herself. Sophie was 9, a dreamer, an artist who was tuned into emotional frequencies that most people don't even know exist. She was constantly creating worlds on her tablet, making up stories about talking animals and enchanted forests. She would go completely quiet and hide away when her parents' voices grew sharp, even if they were whispering, because Sophie could feel the emotional energy in a space sour like a badly mixed color. And little Ben was 4 years old, a tornado of pure, happy chaos that Chloe found both draining and deeply wonderful. He liked to rearrange things into new compositions. He once confused a carpenter from Isabel's studio, saying, "Hello, creator," in front of 2 of their friends, and Isabel had to gently explain that no, the kind man who installed the custom bookshelves was not his father. Thomas just called any man who brought a new design to life in their home creator. This had included the man who delivered a new sculpture and, most unforgettably, an architect featured in a documentary. He adored his mother with the pure, unwavering loyalty of a young boy who had not yet learned that love could have conditions. Isabel was 7 months pregnant. She glided through the rooms she had meticulously designed, one hand on her stomach, whispering to the baby about the cool smoothness of Italian marble and the gentle drama of light filtering through silk curtains. Thomas sensed it first, standing unnoticed in the archway of his mother's studio, listening to her murmur to a child who wasn't there yet. He said nothing. He just watched her with a profound, knowing seriousness in his 10-year-old eyes, then turned and walked away silently. Serafina Reyes met Arthur Vance at an urban design conference in Chicago on a windy, crisp afternoon in October. Arthur Vance had a gravitational pull. Some men are simply born with it, a calm certainty that changes the energy of a room the moment they enter. He had an easy smile and a way of listening that made you feel your most abstract ideas were the most groundbreaking concepts he had ever heard. He was brilliant, decisive, and hummed with an ambition so powerful it felt like a structural force. And Serafina was drawn into his orbit before the keynote speaker had even taken the stage. But when they were alone, away from the blueprints and zoning debates, a different man appeared, one with a surprising tenderness. He would brush a stray curl from her face while she sketched a radical concept for a public park on a cocktail napkin. At their second dinner, he had a bottle of her favorite obscure mezcal waiting, a brand she'd mentioned only once. He understood her technical jokes about soil composition and perennial cycles that sailed over everyone else's heads, which is the most powerful kind of intimacy, the kind that makes you feel not just desired, but understood. She fell for all of him. The way you fall when you're young, assuming the person you see is the person they will always be. What Serafina didn't bring up, what Arthur had no clue about, was that her mother was Eleonora Beaumont. If you followed East Coast philanthropy for the last 30 years, you knew that name. One society journal had called her the matriarch of Beacon Hill. She had built her family's legendary cultural influence, not on flashy donations, but on the quiet, strategic endowment of museums and libraries, one carefully chosen institution at a time, over 3 decades of discipline and a refusal to follow trends that sometimes made her seem out of step in the short term, but made her a legend in the long run. Eleonora Beaumont's personal fortune was a number that seemed abstract to most, yet Isabel's childhood was the opposite of opulent. Her father had died when she was young. Her mother, Eleonora, raised her in a sprawling, book-filled brownstone in Boston, a world away from the glass-walled penthouses with their rooftop pools. She grew up surrounded by art, where the closest family friend was a retired museum curator who would bring them antique maps and call her Isabel. Eleonora Beaumont believed that wealth without purpose was just a more gilded cage. Kneeling in her rooftop garden one afternoon, her hands deep in the soil of a planter box, she told Isabel, "Money you don't earn yourself is an anchor, my love, not a sail. It will either hold you down or make you someone's prize. You have to learn to cultivate your own garden first. Then," she continued, pushing a strand of gray hair from her forehead, "you'll always know who loves you for your talent as a designer, and who just wants an invitation to the unveiling." Isabel took that lesson and planted it in her soul, right next to her mother's recipe for Boston cream pie and the sound of the autumn wind on Charles Street, and she carried it with her everywhere. She told Arthur her mother was in arts and culture. She organized one polite lunch for them before the wedding. Eleonora Beaumont sat across from Arthur in a quiet corner of a Manhattan hotel for exactly 1 hour, sipped iced tea, asked 3 alarmingly insightful questions, and was mostly silent. She took the train back to Boston that same evening. That night, as Isabel was arranging flowers in a vase, her mother stood in the doorway and said, without ceremony or malice, just a simple, clear observation, "He loves the woman you are becoming for him. Just make sure he also loves the woman you are when you're just by yourself, sketching at midnight." Isabel smiled, believing she understood. It would be another 11 years before she would truly understand what her mother had seen in that single hour. Their first years were magnificent, a whirlwind of creative energy. When your shared future is a beautiful home you're designing together, room by exquisite room in perfect sync. Isabel built her own celebrated interior design firm from the ground up, one glowing magazine feature at a time. She raised Thomas and then Chloe. She made their Upper East Side townhome a haven of style and warmth. She was happy, or, perhaps more accurately, Arthur was famous and she was respected, and she hadn't yet realized those were 2 entirely different states of being. The first tiny fractures appeared in year 7. Arthur's firm won the bid for a skyline-defining tower. He started working later, traveling more. It just felt like the price of success. In year 8, the gentle critique started. On her design for a new hotel. "It's gorgeous, but maybe a touch too minimalist for the investors." On her parenting, "You're letting Chloe wrap you around her little finger." In year 9, he stopped pulling her close in bed. If she initiated, he would claim he was exhausted. Always so exhausted. A weariness that was less about a need for sleep and more about a fundamental shift in his desires. Year 10. Isabel learned she was pregnant with their 3rd child. She told Arthur over a rare, quiet dinner at home, her voice trembling with a delicate hope she hadn't dared to feel in years. His reaction was neither excitement nor concern. It was a slight pause, a rapid mental calculation, followed by, "Okay, we'll have to accelerate the plans for the au pair suite." It was the logistical response of a man planning a new phase of a project, not realizing a rival was reading his confidential briefs. Serafina Reyes was named head of a competing landscape architecture firm that Arthur was in a development war with 14 months before the Tuesday that changed everything. She was 32, a principal designer with a reputation for a fierce, ecologically driven vision. She specialized in one thing: identifying powerful men who had begun to see the brilliant women in their lives as comfortable fixtures rather than as dynamic equals. She didn't try to charm Arthur. That was too simple. She challenged his entire philosophy. She asked him about the landmark projects he'd abandoned and what kind of legacy he was truly trying to build, questions Isabel no longer asked because she thought they were building the answers side by side. Serafina made his established vision feel urgent and new again. She would say things like, "Your wife is a true artist. I hope she understands the kind of brutalist politics you navigate daily." And, "To see the world, on your scale, must be an incredibly solitary existence." And then she delivered the single sentence that found its mark. "It seems a man with your ambition needs an equal partner in that ambition, not just a curator for its rewards." And Arthur, who had an extraordinary woman at home, opening a new design gallery, running their household, and carrying their third child, heard those words and took them as truth. Because the most irresistible lie is always the one that confirms the story you secretly tell yourself. And then there was Margaret, Arthur's mother. She had been waiting nearly a decade for a weakness like this to appear, and she filled the crack like fast-drying grout. Margaret had never truly accepted Isabel, not for anything Isabel did, but for what she was. Isabel was too independent. Her quiet confidence came from her own heritage and talent, not from a need for approval. She was too complete on her own. Margaret had wanted a daughter-in-law she could shape and guide into a social asset for her son's career. Isabel had arrived fully formed, built on a foundation much older and more solid than Margaret's, and for that, she was never really forgiven. She would drop her subtle poisons during her weekly calls with Arthur. That Isabel seemed so preoccupied lately, that she was so lost in her decorating projects, that Isabel's real passion was for her own name, not for the Vance legacy. She said it with a tone of deep concern. She said it often. She said it like a saboteur who plants a single, elegant bug and then leans back to wait for the whole building to come down. The night it all came apart was a Tuesday in March. Isabel was at the wide oak table in their library, pinning fabric swatches to a mood board for a new client. 7 months pregnant, her ankles were swollen, her back had the persistent, low-grade ache that marks the third trimester. Not sharp enough to complain about, but too constant to forget. The children were asleep. The house was finally quiet. Arthur was at his desk across the room on his laptop, confirming details for a last-minute site inspection in Chicago. He switched between windows when his tablet, which he had left on the desk, suddenly lit up. A new file had just been synced to a shared project folder. The notification read, "New photos added to Hampton's proposal." But the thumbnail preview wasn't of a building model or a landscape diagram. It was a selfie of Serafina, smiling, with Arthur's arm unmistakably around her shoulder, taken from inside a raw, unfinished room with a spectacular ocean view. Her finger froze on the trackpad. She sat perfectly still. The annual Preservation Society Gala was an exclusive, stuffy affair she'd begged off of, citing exhaustion. The event photographer's gallery was now public. A picture of a city councilman, a socialite, and there, in the blurred background behind them, was her husband, Marcus. Under the soft glow of a chandelier, his lips were touching the temple of a woman who was not her, this past Saturday. The same Saturday, he was supposedly on a last-minute buying trip in Zurich. Isla slowly closed her laptop. The quiet, final click of the machine, shutting down, was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She didn't look away from the blank screen. She didn't let out a single sharp breath. She walked down the long, art-lined hallway to their master suite, gripped the cool marble of the vanity, and met her own eyes in the antique mirror. 7 months pregnant, standing in the Boston brownstone she had spent years meticulously restoring, looking at a digital ghost that proved the man she had built this life with was commissioning a new future with a woman whose name she now knew all too well. She inhaled for a count of 5, held it, and exhaled for 7. She needed to focus on something she could regulate because every other part of her world had just fractured. She repeated the sequence 5 times. Then she ran cold water over her wrists, returned to the grand parlor, and began the ritual of preparing his nightly decaf. 180 milliliters of water, heated to precisely 92 degrees Celsius. She set it on the coaster beside his leather armchair. When Marcus looked up from his tablet, saw the familiar porcelain cup, and mumbled a distracted, "Thanks, my love," she just gave a slight nod. He picked up the mug, retreated into his private study, and the heavy oak door closed between them for the night. When you discover a betrayal of that magnitude, your first instinct is to ignite an inferno, to shout, to throw things, to demand they account for their crime right now. But here is the secret that no one ever shares. The instant you unleash that unprepared rage, you cede all your power. You give them the stage to act remorseful. You let them twist the story. They can feign tears or erupt in anger, somehow making their betrayal a consequence of your actions. Then you are the one left standing alone amidst the ruins of a life they secretly tore down. So, if you can summon the will, and it is a truly monumental effort, you bide your time. Not for long, just long enough to ensure your next action is a calculated strategy, not a wounded reaction. For the following 2 weeks, Isla embodied a quietness that her husband Marcus completely misinterpreted. He saw it as the profound fatigue of late pregnancy. He read it as a sullen retreat, the kind that usually ended in either a week of simmering tension or a tearful apology from her. He was sure she was collapsing inward. He had no idea she was constructing a fortress. Marcus didn't pick up on how the quality of her silence had shifted. Isla stopped asking about the new artists he was courting for his gallery. She no longer put her hand on his arm when they watched old films. She began taking more hushed calls on the small iron balcony overlooking the public garden, her voice a low, steady murmur, speaking the foreign language of asset allocation and custodial accounts that was never meant for him. Marcus felt her withdraw into the final intense phase of her hotel restoration project and was relieved. That simple, immediate feeling of his own comfort was the last piece of evidence Isla required. When the person you have sworn your life to pulls away, you are supposed to feel a sense of dread, not ease. Marcus felt at ease, and that told her their marriage was now just a beautifully restored, empty facade. She was simply the last person to admit the occupancy permit had expired. Her flight to London was booked for a Tuesday. Isla was in the kitchen, portioning meals for her son Noah's week, with a classical cello suite playing softly in the background. Her keynote address was confirmed. This trip, sponsored by her mentor, the reclusive philanthropist Lord Ashworth, wasn't a holiday. It was the unveiling of a project that would define her career. Lord Ashworth was a legend in architectural preservation, who had retired to a sprawling estate in the Cotswolds after a hostile corporate buyout. He had become her greatest advocate, her strategic ally. And Isla always addressed a challenge with a cool, methodical precision. Every action was measured, her entire being focused on the next logical step. Her bags were packed in less than an hour. She sent a detailed schedule to the nannies for Noah and Sophie. She had 5 nights of dinners prepared and labeled in the sub-zero freezer. She left Marcus a text regarding their daughter's upcoming fencing tournament, a detail he had already been reminded of twice, with the time and location pinned to their shared family app. Before the town car arrived, she found Marcus in his study, admiring a new sculpture, and calmly went over her flight details, hotel information, and return date. She reminded him again to make sure Sophie had a ride to her tournament. Marcus gave her a brief, dismissive kiss, said something patronizing about her little hobby with old bricks, and was already dialing his phone before her car had reached the end of their street. By the following morning, he had called his security consultant. Standing in a silk dressing gown, he observed as the locks on all the doors were replaced with a new keyless system. And he felt a profound sense of justification. He had a story now, a narrative his sister Genevieve had helped him solidify. In his version, Isla had chosen her ambition over their family. He was simply protecting himself from a choice she had already made. This is what happens to a man who is gently convinced by the wrong voices that he is the victim. His version of events becomes so vivid that it feels more real than the truth. On Saturday morning, Genevieve was the first to show up. She breezed into the brownstone carrying a box of macarons and wearing a look of smug sympathy that had never once rung true in the decade Isla had known her. She placed the box on the marble island and began to assess the rooms as if taking inventory, adjusting the thermostat, running a finger over the custom furniture, and pausing in the library doorway like a general surveying conquered land. Her new husband, David, trailed in her wake, anxious and quiet, hauling suitcases from a sleek new sedan. He nearly tripped over an ottoman, catching himself on a bookshelf with a muttered apology. David was not a cruel man. He was merely a man who had allowed his thirst for a comfortable life to ferment into a brand of silence that was functionally identical to cowardice. And then, getting out of the car in a chic, all-white linen suit and carrying a leather portfolio, was Camille. She walked through the front door, down the hall, and directly into Isla's home office. The soft chime of her phone pairing with the house's integrated speaker system was a clear, sharp sound of occupation that Isla heard through a secure audio feed thousands of miles across the ocean. Marcus brought the children into the media room, Isla's media room, with its ceiling painted like a night sky and the wall-to-wall shelves of classic films. He looked at his son and daughter with the calm demeanor of a man utterly convinced of his own righteousness. "Your mother has made a choice," he explained. "She chose that old hotel over us. She will not be returning to this house, but I am here, and I will always, always be here for you." Genevieve stood just behind him, nodding her head in solemn agreement. David stared at his expensive loafers. Sophie, sensing the atmospheric pressure drop, had already pulled her younger brother onto her lap, creating a small shield against a danger she couldn't yet define. And Noah, who was 14, stood by the door. He watched his father for a long, silent moment. He didn't protest. He didn't weep. He just looked at him with cool, appraising eyes and said absolutely nothing. Then he turned, went to his room, and closed the door with the gentle, firm click of someone who had just permanently archived a piece of data about his father's character. In an elegant suite in London, with a view of the rain-swept Thames and the scent of old books and Earl Grey tea, Isla monitored the feed on a military-grade tablet. Lord Ashworth sat in an armchair near the window, his expression as calm and composed as the ancient portraits in his manner. His slow, rhythmic breathing was the only other sound. He was a man who had navigated family betrayals and boardroom coups, and he knew a siege when he saw one. On the mahogany table between them rested a leather portfolio. Tooled in gold leaf on the cover were the words, Isla Covington, Director. It contained the founding charter, the legal and financial architecture that would establish her as the head of a new independent architectural preservation trust, endowed by the Ashworth Foundation. He had meant to present it to her after her speech. She hadn't opened it, not yet. Instead, she spoke to him. She told him about Noah's latest coding project, a virtual reality walkthrough of the Acropolis. She told him about Sophie's fierce determination on the fencing strip, how she loved the strategy and discipline of the sport. She described the baby's habit of punching her bladder and swore she saw a flicker of a smile on Marcus's face. She told him how the baby seemed to wake up every night around 2 a.m., as if it were already on a venture capitalist's transatlantic schedule. She mentioned she was leaning towards naming him Leo. She clung to these small, definite, reassuring details because she wasn't prepared for the sheer volume of data stored on that encrypted drive, and because some part of her could still feel the life that was being methodically overwritten. On the fourth morning, her lawyer, Mr. Hayes, handed her a coffee and said, "They are attempting to edit you out of your own source code, Isabel. The summit is in 1 hour. Remind them who the original developer is." She let his words settle in the quiet room. The grief for the life she'd had would have to be cataloged later, a private list of structural failures she would need to address on her own. Then she opened the portfolio. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter from Ashworth on his personal stationery, a thick sheaf of legal documents, and a smaller, sealed envelope bearing her children's names, with the inscription, "For their foundations." The award announcement confirmed what her peers had known for years. Every blueprint, every sustainable material innovation, every community-focused design principle, the entire architectural philosophy of Hayes and Associates, with a portfolio of projects now valued at over $500 million, was the vision of one person: Olivia Hayes, its founder, its future, the woman who had only ever wanted to build something that would last. Olivia read the email with the final itinerary a second time. Then she set her phone down, walked to the window of her hotel room, and watched the neon glow of Tokyo awaken, the bustling streets below completely unaware of the life that was about to be demolished. She did not change her flight home. Not right away. She had a legacy to accept, and in that quiet moment, she began drafting a blueprint for a counterattack that no one in San Francisco could ever predict. Olivia remained in Japan for 1 week. She accepted the Pritzker Prize with grace, fielding calls from developers and city planners who wanted to honor the woman who was redefining modern architecture. She reviewed every file on their shared server, sitting in her suite, illuminated by the glow of her laptop. She ran every legal possibility by her old mentor 4 times, from 4 different angles. She was precise. She was not sentimental. She absorbed the entirety of the career she had built over 15 years, and she allowed it to reinforce her own foundation. Solid, steel-reinforced, and earthquake-proof. She only lost her composure once, the night after the award ceremony. Alone in her minimalist hotel room, she clutched a small, hand-carved wooden block from her son's first building set and stared at a photo on her phone. Olivia, at the groundbreaking for her first skyscraper, beaming, holding a ceremonial shovel, while Marcus stood beside her, smiling at the camera with a look she now recognized as possession, not pride. Marcus watched the ribbons of traffic from his penthouse on the 60th floor of the Thorn Tower, his eyes scanning the San Francisco skyline. It wasn't the pride of a builder admiring his city, but the cold satisfaction of a king surveying his acquisitions. Olivia had once mistaken that ambition for passion. Now she took a deep, steadying breath, and for the first time, truly became Olivia Hayes, the sole architect of her own life. But her new design was still an ocean away. Before Olivia could lay the first stone, she had to withstand a demolition. The initial blast came not from a construction site, but from the sterile silence of a cloud server. She was in Tokyo, reviewing the final schematics for a community library when she noticed a new folder on their shared drive. At 8 months pregnant, scrolling through project files for their smart home, she found it. A woman named Sienna, an interior designer Marcus had mentioned hiring, had uploaded dozens of files. They were mock-ups, not for a single room, but for their entire penthouse. A second folder contained invoices showing Sienna laughing with Marcus over cocktails, dated months ago. Olivia's heart felt like it seized. Then she saw the final file, a signed contract for the purchase of a Napa Valley estate, with a receipt for a custom nursery, scheduled for delivery the following week. "I am so sorry you found it like that, Olivia," Marcus said when she called, his voice a perfectly rendered performance of concern. "But you chose to be on the other side of the world, accepting an award. The children needed a stable home life, and Sienna has been a lifesaver. We've all been struggling since your work became your religion." The words were a wrecking ball, designed to demolish her foundation and frame her as the absent mother from 6,000 miles away. Less than 12 hours later, an article in a major architectural journal's gossip column went live. Pritzker laureate Olivia Hayes extends victory tour, leaving family behind. Sources claim real estate mogul Marcus Thorne is holding down the fort, with help from a new design consultant. Olivia's phone began to buzz incessantly. LinkedIn messages from colleagues, calls from Marcus's parents, even texts from his investors, all asking if she was okay. Each message, another crack in her public facade. Back in their Pacific Heights penthouse, Sienna had already started the demolition. A sun-filled reading nook Olivia had designed for the kids was gone, replaced with a cold, marble monolith. The hand-painted constellations Olivia had put on her son, Leo's ceiling, were gone, as was the gallery wall of their daughter, Mia's artwork in the kitchen. A decade of family life, told in crayon and photographs, had been plastered over with a coat of sterile, unforgiving white. One coat of paint had erased 10 years of a family's soul. Her daughter Mia video called her that evening. Her 6-year-old face was a blurry image of forced cheerfulness. "Mommy, when is your work going to be finished?" "Soon, my sweet girl. Very soon, I promise." There was a pause filled with static. She painted over Leo's stars. Olivia's vision swam. I took a picture of them first. It's saved in my folder. A tiny, trembling breath traveled across the ocean. "Mommy, are you still there?" "I'm here, baby. I'm always here for you." After the call, Olivia walked to the window overlooking the city she was being honored for helping to build, and she felt utterly torn down. It wasn't quiet grief, not a few tears. It was a raw, silent scream, trapped deep in her chest. The kind where your whole body trembles, and you press your forehead against the cold glass, searching for a single structural element that still holds true while your entire world collapses. 8 months pregnant, her greatest career achievement happening on the other side of the planet, her children being taught that she was disposable, her very design for living being systematically demolished by a woman who was living in her home. Sometimes the whole structure fails at once. The betrayal, the shock, the crushing weight of helplessness all find the same fault line. The most dangerous thing you can do in that moment is to try and rebuild on a compromised foundation. So you grieve. You let the building fall. You accept the dust and the rubble. But you do not start planning the new construction until the site survey is complete. And the survey always completes. Olivia's survey completed at 38,000 feet, somewhere over the Pacific. She wiped her eyes, ordered a glass of water, and used the plane's satellite internet to call her oldest mentor, Evelyn. Evelyn wasn't just a mentor. She was the most ruthless intellectual property attorney in California. Olivia knew the worst of the earthquake was not behind her. It was just beginning to shake. Your name is on the architectural copyrights for 3 of his flagship towers, Olivia. Your sustainable design framework is the proprietary asset his entire development firm advertises. You could file a cease and desist that would halt construction on every active site he has by dawn. You could bankrupt his company and turn the land into public parks. Evelyn, I just want my children. I know, but you have leverage. Monumental leverage. For the first time in days, Olivia felt a flicker of strength return to her own framework. She called Marcus from Evelyn's car. The legal blueprints were drawn up. She now had a formidable lawyer, a cloud drive full of evidence proving her foundational contributions, and the undeniable truth of being the creative genius behind the Thorn brand. She told Evelyn she was going home to get her kids. Evelyn squeezed her shoulder. Go get your kids, Mama Bear. We'll schedule the controlled demolition of his entire portfolio for tomorrow morning. Her key card for the penthouse's private elevator beeped with an access denied message. Of course it did. She had to use the main lobby, getting buzzed up to her own home like a stranger, 8 months pregnant and running on pure will. And she waited. Marcus opened the door. Next to him stood his father, looking stern and disapproving. And in the living room, Sienna was directing movers, pointing at a piece of art with the casual authority of someone who already owned the place. Marcus handed her a thick manila envelope. It was an emergency motion for a psychiatric hold, claiming that Olivia's demanding career and the hormonal stress of her pregnancy had made her an emotionally volatile and unfit parent, and that her unannounced arrival could cause the children severe distress. It was supported by a sworn affidavit from his own father, twisting tales of Olivia's creative passion into evidence of manic episodes. Olivia was legally barred from entering her own home. She was forbidden from seeing her own children. She stood in the lobby of the building that featured her own award-winning design, holding a court order that labeled her a danger. As the door slid silently shut, she looked up and saw her son Leo's face, small and pale, peering down from the massive picture window. He pressed his hand to the glass and mouthed one word, "Mama." Olivia raised her hand, pressing her palm against the empty air in front of her. Leo mirrored the gesture, his small hand flat against the reinforced glass. Then his grandfather's silhouette appeared behind him, and an automated blackout shade slid down, wiping him from her sight. Olivia got into a cab and gave the address for a hotel downtown. She sat in the back of the car for 20 minutes after they pulled up, unable to issue the next command. She called Evelyn, who answered on the very first ring. "Where are you? Tell me what's happening." He initiated an ex parte order. "Sophia, I'm cut off from the children." The silence that answered was thick and heavy, a vacuum of controlled fury. Sophia's voice, when it returned, was dangerously precise. "Eleanor, I need you to repeat that word for word, because my brain is refusing to accept it as a valid sentence. I need you." "I'm already in the car. Don't leave your apartment. Don't call him. Don't even let his name form in your thoughts. I'm bringing Cipino and a strategy to digitally incinerate his entire life." Sophia materialized in Eleanor's apartment 30 minutes later, carrying takeout containers, a tablet, and a look that could crash a data center. She laid out a series of documents on the coffee table, handed Eleanor a container of soup, and said, "Okay, here's the game plan. First, we eat. Then, we itemize every recipe, every supplier contract, and every bit of brand goodwill you developed that his startup leveraged for beta testing. After that, we construct a lawsuit so financially ruinous he won't be able to afford the guest Wi-Fi at a public library, much less a legal team. Marcus Thorne is our primary objective because T stands for terminally screwed, which is what he'll be after we file for sanctions based on his fraudulent declarations. Also, I've disliked him ever since that tech gala in 2022, when he called Napa wine just fermented grape juice. Against all odds, Eleanor felt a small, brittle laugh escape. Sophia's firm filed for an emergency hearing, but the court's calendar was jammed. The earliest slot was 2 weeks out, 14 days, 336 hours, since she'd last tucked her kids into bed. Her daughter, Olivia, called her on a tablet from inside the pantry. Her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Mommy, Liam keeps asking when you're coming home from your work trip. He's been carrying your old recipe book around everywhere, and Ethan says I'm spending too much time trying to perfect my knife cuts. I'm trying to be brave, but I don't know what to tell them." "You don't have to do anything but be yourself, my love. I am handling this. I promise you, I'm coming home." He sold the wine cellar, the one Grandpa Vance designed. I saw the truck take it away. A painful silence hung in the air. "But I saved your first menu draft for the restaurant, Mommy. I took a picture of it before she had the walls repainted. I saved it for you. Every single dish." Eleanor clutched the phone to her heart, closing her eyes and breathing through the sharp, sudden spike of pain. You must breathe the way you do when you're reducing a sauce, low, slow, and with absolute focus. If you find yourself in a battle for your own children, only one thing matters: evidence. Document everything, every single text, every reservation he canceled, every photo on the shared family drive, every call he let go to voicemail. Keep copies in 3 distinct places: on a personal device, in a secure cloud server, and with your attorney. The family court system does not operate on emotion, no matter how righteous your anger. The family court operates on proof. Your only job is to become the person with the most proof. The hearing took place 2 weeks later. Sophia and her team dismantled Marcus's claims in less than half an hour. The judge looked intently at the restaurant's profit and loss statements, the glowing reviews from food critics, and the email chains that proved Eleanor was not only a dedicated mother, but the primary architect of their family's financial standing. He dismissed the emergency order with a sharp rebuke to Marcus for wasting the court's time with fabrications. A temporary order was granted in her favor. Eleanor was awarded immediate temporary custody of the children. She drove straight to their house in Pacific Heights. Her kids saw her car pull up and tumbled out the front door before she had even turned off the ignition. Little Liam clung to her leg, burying his face in her jacket. Olivia grasped her mother's arm, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Ethan, her eldest, tried to maintain his composure, but the second Eleanor opened her arms to him, he folded into her embrace and just held on. Marcus was ordered to leave the residence within 72 hours. That evening, standing in her own kitchen, with her children finally safe with her, Eleanor allowed herself a single, fleeting thought. It's done. I have my children. I have my family's legacy. I'll file the divorce papers, and this entire nightmare will finally be over. But Eleanor was unaware that the real nightmare was still 48 hours away. and it would begin with her world turning to black on the cold kitchen tiles. One moment, she was reviewing the seasonal menu for the restaurant, and the next, she was sliding to the floor, her pen clattering on the stone as a silent darkness enveloped her. It was the cumulative weight of the stress, the sleepless nights, the meals she had skipped, 8 months of growing a new life while weathering a hurricane of grief, betrayal, and a brutal legal fight, all without a moment's rest. Ethan dialed 911. He gave the operator their address with a terrifying calm, a degree of poise no 14-year-old should ever possess. With his younger brother, Liam, on his hip and his other hand on the collar of their dog, he said, "My mom is pregnant, and she just collapsed. She's not waking up. You have to send an ambulance right now." At the hospital, the medical team stabilized both Eleanor and the baby, but their instructions were unequivocal: complete and total bed rest. For the remainder of her pregnancy, no stress, no work. She couldn't even get out of bed without her friend Sophia or a nurse assisting her. Less than 24 hours later, Marcus's attorney filed a new emergency petition, alleging that Eleanor was medically unfit and emotionally unstable, demanding that full custody of the children be transferred to him immediately. The second assault landed the next morning. A leading tech journal published a bombshell exclusive on their website. An unnamed source had revealed Eleanor's identity as the daughter and sole heir of the intensely private wine magnate, the late Edward Vance. The article wasn't framed as a story of inheritance. It was framed as a story of epic deception. AI mogul blindsided by wife's secret, 9-figure Napa dynasty. In an instant, the entire narrative was flipped on its head. Eleanor was no longer the betrayed, pregnant wife. She was recast as the manipulative heiress who had tricked her brilliant husband. The online comments were a toxic swamp of misogyny and rage. Marcus, coached by Isabel's PR consultant, appeared on a popular tech podcast, playing the role of the shocked, wounded husband to perfection. "I had no idea," he claimed, his voice filled with practiced disbelief. "She concealed the Vance vineyard, the sheer scale of it, from me for our entire marriage. It forces me to question everything. My only concern now is to shield my children from any further deception." The third attack came that afternoon. Ethan was in the school library when another student shoved a phone in his face, displaying the article. The comment section was right below the headline: anonymous people calling his mother a fraud, a liar, a silver-spooned sociopath who had played his father for a fool. Ethan threw a punch. His suspension was immediate. When Eleanor called him from her hospital room, his voice was hollow. "They're all saying you lied to Dad, that you're the bad guy. Everyone believes it's true. Ethan, you have to listen to me." "Is it true? Did you lie?" A long, heavy silence stretched across the line between her sterile room and his. "I never told your father the full extent of Grandpa Edward's estate. That much is true. But I have never, ever lied about who I am. I'm the same mother who taught you how to make pasta last week and who reads to you every night." "Then why does everyone online think you're a monster?" Eleanor had no answer that a 14-year-old could possibly understand. She hung up the phone and lay back against the hospital pillows, one hand resting on her belly, where her daughter was kicking gently. For the first time, she let a thought she had always suppressed take hold. Maybe this is a fight I can't win. This was the true bottom. Not hearing the AI recording of the affair, not being locked out of her own home, not the ambush of news cameras after the hearing. This powerlessness in a hospital bed, her children exposed and vulnerable, the world branding her a villain, and her own son starting to believe it. This is the moment most people would break. Eleanor Vance did not break, but she felt the first fine cracks begin to appear. When the world casts you as the villain, when a narrative built on lies becomes the accepted version of reality, your first instinct is to scream your truth. You must fight that impulse. Not yet. Public opinion is a tidal wave. It crashes ashore with immense power, and then it recedes. A court order, however, is granite. You build your foundation on granite. Let the tidal wave do its damage. The truth is patient. It can wait for the right time to be revealed. Eleanor couldn't move, so she began to strategize. First from the hospital, and then from the guest suite of Sophia's penthouse, overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, where she would live out the final weeks of her pregnancy. She started instructing her legal team with the sharp precision of a woman whose mother had taught her that the most decisive breakthroughs happen in sterile, silent labs. She had digital forensic specialists create an exhaustive map of Marcus's financial data. They discovered he'd been siphoning money from their joint investment accounts for over a year to fund Sienna's entire existence. The down payment on her Palo Alto condo, the lease on her new high-end electric car, indulgent trips to wellness retreats in Tulum, and an absurdly expensive biohacking device Isabel had seen on a venture capital report and foolishly assumed was for a promising health tech startup. She was no longer just collecting leverage for a settlement. She was compiling data for a hostile takeover of her own life. A security consultant confirmed Sienna now had full biometric access to their San Francisco penthouse, sleeping in Isabel's bed, using her home office, and, in the most galling twist, showing off a unique, prototype smart ring on her Instagram feed. It was a one-of-a-kind device from her father's research lab, a priceless piece of diagnostic technology he'd given her before he died, which Sienna had clearly found in a drawer and was now wearing as a trendy accessory. Cybersecurity experts decrypted the Project Nightingale files, a log of his affair with Sienna that went back more than a year. One audio note recorded by Marcus on the very day Isabel was at the hospital for a high-risk pregnancy scan laid bare the true depth of his cruelty. 7 words. Legacy genetics secured. Time to build the upgrade. Her best friend, Leah, came to see her every day, singularly determined to make Isabel laugh. Leah was swiping through the financial data on Isabel's tablet. He gave her a $250,000 seed investment for her app. For her. Isabel, I have seen this woman's Instagram stories. Her idea of an algorithm is a filter that makes your teeth whiter. This isn't just cheating. It's an insult to the entire venture capital industry. Leah, don't. I'm just saying, if you're going to torpedo your marriage, at least do it for a founder with a viable product. Against all expectations, Isabel actually chuckled, but the one piece of information that crystallized her grief into something cold, sharp, and absolute came directly from a video call with her own daughter. In the middle of the call, her 6-year-old, Lily, held up a drawing and proudly announced she was learning to code, referring to Sienna as Mommy 2.0. It wasn't a child's mistake or a moment of confusion. Marcus had been coaching her, deliberately, systematically teaching his daughter to view her own mother as an obsolete version needing an upgrade, all while she was pregnant with his son and fighting for the company they had built together. There is a kind of anger that burns cleaner than betrayal and cuts more precisely than any sorrow. It is the unique fury of a mother who discovers someone has tried to delete her from her own child's operating system. It is the only motivation you ever need, because once that process is initiated, it runs until the very end. 3 weeks after that call, Isabel delivered a perfectly healthy baby boy. She named him Leo. Her best friend Leah held her hand while a small framed patent for a groundbreaking gene editing technique discovered by her father sat on the bedside table. She healed, she grew focused, and 8 weeks after Leo was born, she was ready. The Bay Area Innovators Summit was being held at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and for the first time ever, its keynote panel would be sponsored by the Camden Hayes Institute, chaired by its new leader, Isabel Hayes. The attendee list was a hand-picked group of 600 of the most powerful founders, engineers, and venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. Isabel ensured an invitation went to Marcus's venture firm, with the primary sponsor's name listed simply as the CH Institute. It was a name Marcus had glanced at on family financial reports for years and dismissed as some small, sentimental charity, never once connecting it to the foundational biotech empire his wife's family had built. Because Marcus was the kind of man who never bothered to read the documentation on his own wife. Leah, securing the clasp on Isabel's diamond bracelet on the night of the summit, caught her friend's eyes in the mirror. You are about to walk into a room and casually inform your husband that your family's little institute could acquire his entire fund with a single wire transfer, all while his girlfriend is in the front row. This is the most elegant public execution in the history of Silicon Valley, and I am savoring every single nanosecond. Isabel calmly adjusted the bracelet. It's not an execution, Leah. It's a market correction. Of course, and a hostile takeover is still a takeover. It just comes with better craft cocktails. The main hall of the SFMOMA was a temple of minimalist design and immense wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city skyline, and the titans of the tech world moved between interactive art installations, sipping artisanal mezcal. The air vibrated with the quiet hum of disruptive power and new money. Marcus arrived with Sienna on his arm. He was the perfect image of a VC kingpin, wearing a $5,000 designer hoodie, radiating the unshakable confidence of a man convinced he had already gamed the system. He saw his firm's logo flash on a secondary screen and felt a jolt of satisfaction. His managing partner gave him a nod from across the atrium. Sienna, looking sleek and ambitious at his side, was already scanning the crowd, her mind calculating the net worth and influence of everyone in her line of sight. Leah's contacts from the policy world were gathered near the robotics display, exuding the special kind of confidence that comes from knowing the people who write the regulations. A close colleague of Isabel's late father stood near the entrance, observing the new arrivals with an expression that said he would much rather be sequencing a genome. The evening's host, a renowned tech journalist who had known the Hayes family for decades, walked to the stage. He spoke with genuine admiration about true innovation, about the city's scientific bedrock, and about the woman whose family's work had enabled a generation of medical miracles. A woman who believed the most important legacy to leave her daughter was a rigorous commitment to ethical science. And then he announced, "It is my great honor to introduce to you all the new chair of the Camden Hayes Institute." The sweeping cantilevered staircase at the center of the hall was suddenly lit. There stood Isabel, in a dress of stark white, its lines as clean and profound as a double helix. She wasn't simply wearing a dress, she was embodying an idea, and as she began her calm descent, a silence fell over the summit before, group by group, the entire room got to its feet. The applause began with the legendary bioengineers who understood what the Hayes name meant, then spread until all 600 guests were standing. Tech billionaires, data scientists, venture capitalists, and AI pioneers, the absolute core of Silicon Valley's power structure, all sensed a fundamental market shift was occurring, even if they'd never heard her name. Marcus's bottle of expensive kombucha froze on its way to his lips. At a table near the front, Sienna's carefully constructed expression of bored superiority began to glitch, then crashed completely. Feeling the entire room's valuation suddenly reprice, Marcus's partner clutched his own phone. The man just stared at the floor and whispered, "It's her. Oh no, we are so screwed." Isabel reached the podium and looked out at the audience. She did not look for Marcus's face. It was irrelevant data. For 10 minutes, she spoke about her father, about foundational research, and about the fundamental difference between disrupting a market for profit and discovering a truth for the future. She told the story of her first research project, a complex protein folding problem, and a lesson her father taught her, which she'd kept on a post-it note for 20 years. A system's value is not defined by its user interface, but by the integrity of its core code. She mentioned a comprehensive research proposal she had authored. She didn't specify the project or what became of it. She just said, "My father had that initial proposal peer-reviewed and archived, and it has sat on my desk for 15 years. Just recently, that entire framework was dismissed by an investor who failed to see its long-term value. A young PhD on my team retrieved it from a server folder marked for deletion because he understood what it represented, even when the person in charge of the funding had forgotten." She let that thought hang in the completely silent hall. That is what our work is truly about. It is not about the billion-dollar exit. It is not about the splashy product launch. It is about the foundational code our children will innovate upon because we taught them what is truly built to last. At the charity gala, Isabella never once looked toward Damien's podium. She didn't need to. The whispers had already circulated through the grand ballroom, and every guest understood the meaning of the silence that hung in the air, where his name should have been praised. When her violin solo concluded, and the roar of applause finally subsided, Damien made his way through the sea of tuxedos and gowns. He moved with the uncertain steps of a man realizing a priceless artifact has just slipped through his fingers, unsure if he should plead for its return or demand it back. He called her name. She turned, and instantly 2 figures flanked her, their timing so perfect it was clear they had been waiting for this exact confrontation. Prepared for a battle Damien couldn't begin to comprehend, Ms. Albright, a woman whose severe suit and unyielding expression spoke of a law firm that had guarded New York's old money for generations, presented him with a crisp legal folio. Damien accepted it. Inside were 4 items. The first was a dissolution of marriage filing, executed with surgical precision. The second was an emergency restraining order, citing extreme emotional distress to a pregnant woman, already stamped and authorized by a family court judge. The third was a meticulously documented report from an art appraiser, detailing how gallery funds, marital assets, had been used to acquire a Degas sketch for his gallery assistant. The fourth was a copy of their prenuptial agreement, highlighting the infidelity clause, which immediately and irrevocably voided his claim to any assets held by the Rossi Family Trust, including their Central Park West penthouse. That clause had been a non-negotiable addition from her father, who, after one single dinner with Damien, decided his daughter's future would be built on bedrock, not sand. Isabella had never felt the need to bring it up, until this moment. Damien had 2 weeks to vacate the property. Tucked behind the legal filings was a single, elegantly printed card. It was an official notice from the auction house's board, indefinitely suspending his partnership, pending a full ethics investigation. A handwritten note from Ms. Albright was clipped to it. "The Rossi family has retained our firm since 1905. We are certain this can be resolved without Mr. Rossi Sr.'s direct involvement." Damien stood there, frozen in his $5,000 tuxedo, amid the swirling gala, holding 4 pieces of paper that had just dismantled his entire life. Isabella regarded him not with rage or triumph, or even sadness. Though the grief was a fragile symphony she would have to conduct privately for years. She looked at him the way a master musician regards an instrument that has been irreparably cracked. It was a calm, dispassionate, and final judgment. She then turned and walked away, her legal counsel falling into step behind her like a protective shadow. The chatter of the auction resumed around them, and Damien finally understood the true composition of his wife's quiet power. This wasn't bad luck. This was a perfectly executed performance. This was the finale, and a finale is nothing more than the inevitable result of the notes that came before. Damien lost the penthouse. He wasted 12 of his 14 days meeting with attorneys, who all confirmed the Rossi Trust was an ironclad fortress. He tried reaching his mistress, but her calls were now being screened by her very new, very expensive lawyer. He called his own father, who offered only empty condolences. He ended up in a soulless, furnished apartment in Tribeca that felt like a hotel suite, because he had only ever known how to acquire spaces, not create a home. Damien had only ever curated collections that others had imbued with meaning. And once Isabella was gone, he realized the value of his own name was a fraction of the prestige he had borrowed from hers. The mistress's exit was clean and efficient, with no more access to the penthouse, no invitations to exclusive art world events, and no leverage with the Rossi name. She vanished. Women like her don't linger on acquisitions that fail to appreciate and value. The truth had surfaced during a quiet afternoon in her music room, reviewing insurance documents for their collection. Isabella's sharp eye for detail caught an anomaly, a bill of sale for a small, unsigned sculpture he'd claimed was a gift. A quick search of the artist revealed it had been sold to his mistress. His affair wasn't a crime of passion, it was a series of poorly disguised transactions. From his office across town, Damien's business partner, Arthur, saw the news of the auction house suspension and just shook his head. He said aloud to the empty gallery, "Well, that explains the odd accounting." Isabella's mother, Katerina, sent a frantic 5-paragraph text message filled with emotional ultimatums. It was all about the Rossi family's reputation, their standing in the city, and the absolute necessity of avoiding a public scandal. Isabella read it through once. Then she screenshotted it and sent it to Ms. Albright with one line, "For the file." She never responded to her mother. Arthur sent a text. Saw the gallery ledger. Knew something was off. Should have pushed. My bad. Isabella saw his admission, let it settle, then put her phone down. She didn't reply, but she also didn't delete his number. Isabella was a musician, trained in harmony and resolution, not in holding dissonant chords of resentment. But the most crucial discovery was made in an old violin case in her father's study. Tucked inside the velvet lining, beside his favorite sheet music, was a letter from him, written 3 years before he died. In it, her father explained he'd had Damien discreetly investigated after their engagement party. The investigator's report had mentioned the mistress's name a full year before Damien had even proposed. Her father had known all along. He chose not to act. His letter explained why. My dearest Isabella, you have perfect pitch. You have the right to hear a discordant note in your own life and decide for yourself when the performance is over. I would never rob you of that strength, but I will always make sure you have a stage to return to. The penthouse trust, the prenup, the law firm on retainer, it was all his safety net. It was her father's final composition, a maestro's loving note to the daughter he knew was his masterpiece. Isabella read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it back in the case. She sat in the silence that followed, a quiet that seemed to stretch for an eternity. A year later, on a crisp autumn morning, the kind of day that feels like a reward for surviving a brutal winter, Isabella stands by the grand piano in the sun-drenched music room of her family's Hudson Valley estate, looking out over the fiery colors of the autumn trees. The home had been carefully, lovingly restored. Her father's vinyl records were back on the shelves. The family photo albums were open on the coffee table, filled with pictures her brother had salvaged, and in a new silver frame, there was a photo of her newborn son. Her son Luca's colorful baby toys are scattered on a soft rug nearby. New sheet music is spread across the piano. She has converted the adjoining library into her personal recording studio. Isabella ends a conference call with the conductor of the London Philharmonic. She is poised, direct, and assured. She radiates the profound peace of a woman who didn't just reclaim her life, but composed an entirely new one. She closes her laptop and stretches, taking a deep, calming breath. Her son, Luca, coos from his playmat, batting at a musical mobile that plays a soft lullaby. He holds up a small wooden block for her, his expression one of intense concentration, as if presenting a priceless gem. Isabella looks at the block, then at her son's tiny, determined face, and a laugh bubbles up from deep inside her. Not a polite, restrained sound, but a rich, joyous melody. It was the sound of someone who had finally stopped playing a part and started writing her own score. Her brother walks in a moment later, holding 2 cups of tea, and playfully ruffles Luca's hair, teaching him how to clap his hands, already sharing the rhythm of family. Isabella smiles, watching them, a look of pure contentment on her face. Her brother asks quietly, "You okay, Isa?" Isabella looks at him, her anchor, the man who had quietly backed up all her digital files before the split, and who had supported her move out of the city without a moment's hesitation. "I'm more than okay, Marco. I am finally home." And in her heart, she knew that was the truest note she had ever played. She never raised her voice. She never argued over the contents of the Central Park West penthouse. She refused to audition for the approval of a man whose art gallery was a facade, built on her family's connections and his empty promises. She simply practiced. And when the divorce was finalized, she closed the lid of her violin case with a soft, definitive click. The same sound it made every night after she finished her scales, with Luca's soft breathing echoing from the nursery down the hall. Isabel stared blankly at the rain-streaked windows of her Seattle penthouse. Her mother, Eleanor, found her in the study, where a tablet lay discarded on the floor, its screen still glowing with the messages that had shattered her world. "I was saving this for after the baby came," Eleanor said softly, her voice a gentle anchor in the storm. "But I think your father would want you to have it now." She placed a worn, leather-bound journal on the desk. It was her father's private logbook, filled with his thoughts on art, life, and a single, sealed letter for his daughter. A small card fell from the pages, inscribed with the words, "For the one who always understood the artist's heart." With a trembling hand, Isabel read the final part of her father's letter aloud. The only words we hear are, "You must watch over your mother. Not because she is weak. She has a will more resilient than any masterpiece, but because even the strongest creations deserve to be cherished, not perpetually weathered." Ethan gently set the laminated recipe card on the bedside table and looked at his mother, a new awareness in his eyes. He gave a single decisive nod, the kind of nod a boy gives when he has just chosen what kind of man he wants to be. Eleanor smoothed the hair from his forehead, lowered the lights, and turned her thoughts back to the rolling hills of Napa, to a home that was finally and entirely her own. If you found meaning in this story, I hope you'll consider subscribing. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments. At what exact moment did you suspect Damien's entire tech startup was built on a foundation of lies? We are so excited to bring you the next chapter. As a final note, this tale was meticulously imagined, scripted, and produced by our team to offer a story filled with authentic emotion and powerful takeaways. Every personality, location, and piece of dialogue was shaped to entertain, motivate, and be a testament to the fact that your own value is never dictated by someone unable to appreciate it.